Good morning, everyone. My name is Reverend Carrie Hunter, and I'm the spiritual director of the Center for Spiritual Living in Victoria. And I would like to welcome you this morning to our online service. It will be lovely when we can all be together again and to see one another in physical form rather than on the screen. But being able to see you on Zoom is absolutely special as well. I just love you all. And for those of you who are tuning in later in the week to our recording of this service today, we welcome you. It's lovely to have you with us. And when we are back in person again, you can find us at 380 Cook Street in Victoria. If you haven't been with us before, we'd just love to welcome you there. And we can't wait for that day when we can all be together again. So today, we are starting a new series of talks, which I will get into a little bit later. But I would like to invite Reverend Joanna Drury to pray us in this morning. Joanna, lovely to have you with us as well.
Thank you, Carrie. So I invite you to close your eyes and know the truth of who you are, spirit in form. And I'm going to begin the treatment this morning with a brief poem from Science of Mind by Ernest Holmes. Thou art the center and circumference of my life, the beginningless and endless part of me, the eternal reality of me, the everlasting power within me, the eternal good working through me, the infinite love impelling me, the limitless peace and calm within me, the perfect life living through and in me, the joy of the soul and the light of the spirit illumining me. O Lord God, eternal and forever blessed, thou art my whole being. And as we know this to be true, that spirit, God, universal consciousness is truly all in all. And knowing this, we know that our own lives are two expressions of that divine presence that is everywhere all the time. With this knowledge, we know there is no room for hardship, ill health, worry, or how can those things be present in spirit, which is perfection, complete and perfect in itself. God is all in all. And as we know this to be true, we know that our lives are expressions of spirit. Knowing this, we know that peace, abundant good health, harmony, love, joy, and abundance in all good things are our birthright, the gifts of life, of spirit, as we come into this world in form, with our gifts and talents, sharing those with others, with the world, knowing that we are here on purpose and that our lives are divinely guided and blessed. I give thanks for the power of this teaching. I give thanks for this community and for Reverend Carrie, Reverend Rachel, Lassia, and for each of you as we in community pray for the perfection of spirit to manifest in every part of the world and in our own lives and in the lives of all those we love. I give thanks for life itself, for the beauty of this day, and for this opportunity to share truth principles and to take them into our own hearts. I release my word to spirit, to the law, knowing it is so, and so it is.
Thank you, Reverend Joanna. That was lovely. And it's now my great pleasure to introduce to you Darlene Haynes, our music director. We haven't been having music for a while in our online services, and Darlene, it's an absolute joy to have you back with us today.
And as you all are muted, please join with me in singing this song by Jack Fowler called We Come Together. We come together in this moment. We bind our hearts and minds, for we all form a tapestry woven from one life, one creation, undivided, all unique expressions of God. We come together now in one accord. We come together in this moment. We bind our hearts and minds, for we all form a tapestry woven from one life, one creation, undivided, all unique expressions of God. We come together now in one accord.
Oh, thank you so much, Darlene. It's lovely to have some music again with our service, and it's always wonderful to listen to you. As I mentioned earlier, I'm beginning a new series today, and it is called The One Mind, and it is based upon the book by the same title, which was written by Larry Dossey. I'm not sure that there. I think you can see it now. I've had this book for about, I guess, 5 years, and I'd never opened it, and it just was beckoning to me in the last week or so. And I thought, when that happens, I learned to trust it. So I pulled it off the shelf and thought, this is what it's going to be about for this next month. And there, I don't know how many of you know Larry Dossey or know of him. He's a fairly prolific writer, speaker, has been around now for a long time. And he's a contemporary of Joe Dispenza and Greg Braden, Bruce Lipton, people of that ilk, which I would call the new thought, as opposed to, to the kinds of science that we've been exposed to in the past. And I have mentioned this before, that, we were living in the age of Newtonian physics, and we have moved into the era of quantum physics. Now, not all universities are yet teaching quantum physics. It is really new, and I guess it must take a lot for people to change, because they are still teaching the old way. But the Newtonian physics is about everything that we can see and hear and feel and touch and so on. It's not about the invisible world, it's about the visible world. But the quantum is about the invisible, the place where everything begins, where absolutely all of that power is that starts to create and to manifest everything. And it's there that we find the oneness of everything. And I'm always excited when I get talking about something like this because I'm remembering that in the textbook, Ernest Holmes begins with, we all look forward to the day when science and religion walk hand in hand through the visible and the invisible. And so when I'm reading these books, it's reminding me that we've arrived at that time. And I still absolutely marvel that Dr. Holmes, 100 years ago, was already there, already knew this and taught this. But there wasn't the science there to back it up, and now there is the science that's proving that everything comes out of that vast, invisible sea of what I call God stuff, spirit, the universe, whatever it is you want to call God. Um, but that's where everything begins, with thoughts that are impressed into it. And so I'm referencing this today in the one mind. And the title of my talk today is "One Plus One Does Not Always Make Two." And I'll get into that a little bit later, and just how that is so. But science of mind references the one mind very frequently. And Larry Dossey gives some examples of how this works. And so I thought that before I get into it, I will give you one of the examples that he uses just to kind of set things up. And he talks about a family, a husband and wife named Marilyn and David Winkler, and they have a 15-month-old daughter called Kate. And both Marilyn and David decided they needed a real break, a holiday. And they decided they wanted to go to St. Lucia. And they weren't going to take Kate with them. So David asked his mother to come and look after little Kate. Now, Kate was a toddler. She only had a few words that she could speak. She wasn't yet very vocal. She'd never spoken a complete sentence, just a word here and there. Anyway, off went the parents, and they were holidaying in the Caribbean, and they decided to take a boat tour. It was a small boat, and while they were on the boat, they both loved the water. They both loved being on the water, being in boats. They had no fears of any kind. But that day, Marilyn was uneasy on the water, and she kept looking around, and the sea was incredibly calm. One of those days where there wasn't a ripple except where the boat was going through the water, and she kept picking up little bits of things off the floor of the boat. There were a few nails, and she picked them up and threw them overboard, and there were little kind of splinters of wood and so on, and she threw those overboard. And she just had the feeling that if they should capsize for some reason, that something like this might fly at them and cause some damage. And she knew that her thoughts were really, really strange and unfounded, but she just couldn't help herself. Anyway, they were moving along, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, came a 30-foot wave, and the boat capsized. And she and David found themselves 30 feet under water, and each of them struggling to swim upward. And at that same time, little Kate was sitting in her high chair at home, and her grandmother was feeding her lunch. And little Kate looked at her grandmother and said, "Mommy and Daddy are drowning, and Daddy has a cut in his head, and he's bleeding." This came out of this little girl who had never spoken in sentences and only knew a few words. And her grandmother looked at her, completely dumbfounded by what she was saying. Well, it turned out Marilyn and David were rescued, and David had a large cut in his head. He was bleeding profusely. He had to have 27 stitches in his head. And they decided to cut their trip short, and they flew back home. And they were astounded when they heard what little Kate had said to her grandmother. And this is what Larry Dossey would call the local or the non-local mind. And the way that Dr. Holmes would express this is that we are all in the one mind. It's like this great sea that we're in, and there are waves on the sea. And you've heard me say this many times before. And you see a wave, and it's an individual wave, but it's not separate from the ocean. it is still part of the ocean. And so it's like we are all waves on this great sea of God, and we're totally connected in every way and all the time. We just don't disappear into nothingness or be separate from one another. We are always together in that sea. And so this is what Dr. Dossey calls the one mind, and what Ernest Holmes called the one mind. It's where everything exists at the same time. Now, we have a problem absorbing that a lot of the time, because we think, well, here I am, I'm an individual, I have this physical form, and we know that in this teaching, we know that we are all spirit having a human experience, that each one of us has this power and presence within us. It just happens that that during a period of time, we are a wave on the vast sea of God. And so that's when we appear to be individual, and we are individualized expressions of God, but we are never separate from God. And that's the thing that we need to really keep our minds around, to realize that we are all connected. Every single one of us is connected to one another, and to those everywhere, to the 7.5 billion people on this planet that we don't even know, that we are all connected to them in the same way um, that our DNA is in our children and in our relatives, the same DNA. It's kind of like the DNA of God is in every one of us, and that's what relates us one to the other. So what we need to remember is that, our brains are organs of thought. We tend to think that our minds are there in our brains. But it's not so. Our brains are organs of thought. We can use them to think. But mind is all around us. Mind is everywhere. It's also in us, but it is not inside the brain. We connect with mind with our thoughts. And of course, that's what our teaching is all about. It's about using our thoughts in a positive way, so that we can create better lives for ourselves and for everyone around us, and certainly for this planet. And God knows we need it right here, and we need it right now. Dr. Holmes wrote, mind is potential energy. Mind is potential energy, while thought is a dynamic force which produced the activity for manifestation. In other words, mind infused with thought manifests. And so that's the power of all that is, the great sea of God stuff, is the power that's there for us to use with our thoughts to manifest form. Again, this is not news to anybody who's in this teaching. It's just a reminder, and sometimes we need to be reminded of things like this, because as I keep saying, we get it, we lose it, we go on with our lives, and all of a sudden things happen and we start to feel separate, but we are never, ever separate. And so what we need to also understand is that we've never seen mind. I haven't seen it, you haven't seen it. There isn't your mind and my mind and his mind and her mind, or even God's mind. It is just one mind. It's all of that energy out there. And I think that it's really interesting to consider, because every once in a while we'll hear of 2 or 3 individuals who've invented something that is almost the same. And you think, gosh, how come all at once these same people have the same idea? Or there'll be a movie that comes out, or a series of movies for example, in the summertime, where there'll be 2 or 3 movies with a common theme. You think, how can that happen? And the thing is that all of that energy that's out there contains all of this information, anything that we need to know. And I think that sometimes when there's a focus on something, people start to download the same information, maybe with a slightly different twist to it. But it fascinates me to see this kind of thing happening over and over again. And it's kind of the same thing as the experience that the Winklers had with their little daughter, Kate. There was this vast physical distance that separated them, but there was certainly no separation in mind. And we've likely all had some experience that's similar to that, maybe not a shipwreck, but but other experiences that take us to that place. And so I think when this happens, we're in a place of heightened connection. Sometimes if we're concerned about someone in our lives, um, if somebody is ill or if somebody's traveling and we're worried about them, whatever that happens to be, I think that there is a heightened awareness, a heightened connection, and and these kinds of things happen more readily. And as I was thinking of this, I was remembering my daughter Kendall when she was a photojournalist in South Africa many years ago. There was a lot of violence going on, and she was there for a year and then home for a few months, went back again after that. But during that time, I was concerned about her, and she used to call me every morning at 6 o'clock to let me know that she was okay. That was the end of her day and basically the beginning of mine. But I sometimes, CNN was the only network that was covering, or the only cable station that was covering South Africa. It was the year before Nelson Mandela was elected. And so I would turn on CNN in the morning just to see what was happening that day, because of course they cover all of the bad stuff and none of the good stuff. And I actually saw my daughter one morning running from sniper fire and diving under a tank on the street. Kind of thing no mother wants to see. But just to give you some sense of what was going on at that time and the kind of focus that I had on her. And there was one night that I felt really uneasy and I was really worried about her, as opposed to my 6 a.m. And the feeling wouldn't go away. And I kept phoning her number and there was no answer. So I kept calling and calling, no answer. Finally, I called the newspaper where she worked. It was called the New Nation, and Kendall was um, the only woman on staff, and she was the only white person on staff. And I finally got through to her editor, and I said, "I'm Kendall's mom," and he said, "Oh my God, she's got it. It's fabulous. And he was really, and I said, "I'm sorry, I can't reach her. I don't know where she is. I'm worried about her." And he said, "Oh," he said, "we told her to take the weekend off." And he said, "She's gone to Soweto to visit some friends there for the weekend." And I said, "But she's okay." And he said, "Oh, she's okay, but she's got it. We're so excited about." And I mean, I didn't have the wherewithal to say she's got what, and hung up the phone. And but I thought, okay, she's safe. That's all I needed to know. And the next morning in the Globe and Mail on the front page was a photograph of um, of a group of people who were shot and killed in front of her eyes in one of the townships, or just outside of the township of Alexandria. And when I finally could talk to Kendall, and this particular photograph had been sent around the world. It was on newspapers everywhere on the front pages. And when I was finally able to talk to her, a lot of journalists had been placed up against a wall with guns to their head. And it was utter chaos outside this township. And Kendall managed to have the wherewithal to duck behind a car where she wasn't seen. And as these executions were taking place, not of the journalists, but of others, um, she took photographs. She said she had no memory of raising her camera and taking the photographs. She had no idea until she got back to the newspaper and developed the photos. But my uneasiness had been so powerful that night um, that I could not stop. I mean, sometimes we can just put things out of our minds and say, "Oh, well, that's just silly." But I knew there was something wrong. She and I have had that connection from the time she was just a little tiny tot. And I won't go into all the stories, but there are many of them like that. And I think that most of you have probably had experiences with your children or with your loved ones where you've had an instinct, an intuitive hit that there is something going on, and it may not be good, or it may be something really wonderful too. So, so again, that's dealing with what Larry Dossey calls the non-local mind, or the one mind. Non-local meaning it's not just sitting inside our brains. It is out there everywhere, and we are all a big part of it. And we need to understand that our lives are just not a lot of controlled experiments. You know, we sometimes think we have control over everything. Well, most of us know that we don't have control over everything, but there's a great desire to have control over everything. And they're not controlled experiments. Dossey wrote this quote, which I've written down: extraordinary events occur in the course of most lives, and it's foolish to dismiss them just because they are extraordinary and one of a kind. Um, all of us who have these kinds of experiences or who follow our intuition, and we tend to do that more in this teaching than others might, because we're so much aware of how our intuition develops as we train our minds and as we get further into this teaching. And so we tend to really honor that. But there are skeptics who will say, "Oh, that's ridiculous," or "That's just a coincidence." You know, these kinds of coincidences happen all the time. And there's a scholar at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. His name is John Beloff, and he said that to be a skeptic is basically intellectual cowardice. To be a skeptic is intellectual cowardice. In other words, when we're saying, "Oh, these things couldn't possibly happen," we are perhaps afraid of what that might mean, or perhaps some people are afraid of what it might mean. It might mean that they have to climb out of the little boxes that they've surrounded themselves with, and open their minds to new ideas, to new ways of thinking. And certainly, I'm not specifically talking about this intuitive part of us and of our lives, but in terms of spirituality and in terms of the various religions, I think it's one of the reasons why so many churches are failing these days. It's because people are they're skeptical. They just say, I just can't believe this stuff. Now, what they can't believe is the old version of God, the old man who sits on a cloud and who judges and who, is going to punish us if we do anything wrong. Most people cannot really accept that kind of thinking anymore. And so there are still some who want to just stay in that comfortable little box, because getting out of it means surrendering everything they've ever believed. And that's difficult for people to do. But as we do allow ourselves to open up and to get into a new way of thinking and to allow ourselves to trust our intuition, our lives start to transform. And we notice that in so many ways. Dossey says, believing what cannot be explained, invites us to open our minds to a greater power and to accept what we might wish to see as unacceptable. So in other words, these stories that are extraordinary, might seem unacceptable to some, but this is where we are invited to open our minds up and to accept them and to understand that there is so much in the invisible that we can't see. There's so much in the invisible that we can hardly understand. I mean, when you think about this planet and all of the people on it, and that's only a little beginning of what we can comprehend. When you think of the vast cosmos, of the ever expanding universe, it's the kind of thing that maybe wants us to kind of climb under the covers because it's just too huge to contemplate. But the thing is, that is the vastness of God. That's what's exciting about all of this. And the exciting thing is that we get to use this power. It's always there for us to use if we can get over ourselves. Or, my favorite expression of Emerson's, get your bloated nothingness out of the way. We can make things so difficult for us when in fact we can open up and make things so much easier. So the question is, do we really believe this? And I know I keep asking this. Do you believe this? Can you let yourself believe this? Or are we all just struggling? Just struggling individuals, devoid of hope, and faith and unconditional love and all of those things. And the thing is, we get to choose. Like with everything else in our lives, we get to choose. We get to say right here and right now, I give up my skepticism. I give up that old way of thinking. Right here and right now, I accept this new thought, these new thoughts, this teaching, this magnificent way of creating a better life for myself and a better life for everybody else on this planet. There's a Buddhist observation that I want to read to you and share with you because I think it's really relevant and I really like it. Um, it is only when you hunt for it that you lose it. Isn't that interesting? It's only when you hunt for it you lose it. Because, of course, if we're looking for something, then it means we've lost it. So it's only when you hunt for it you lose it. You cannot take hold of it, but equally, you can't get rid of it. And while you can do neither, it goes on its own way. You remain silent, and it speaks. And you speak. And we dissolve into the nothingness that is everything. I really, really love that quote. I think it's really, really important. And Larry Dossey says that, when we identify with so completely with someone that the distinctions between self and others are overcome, then we have entered the domain of the one mind. I'm going to repeat that. Larry Dossey writes, when we identify so completely with someone that the distinctions between self and the other are overcome. In other words, we don't see any difference between us. We don't see any separation between us. We have entered the domain of the one mind, and this prepares us for actions we would not even consider in an everyday frame of mind. And he talks in the book about some of these extraordinary things that people do without thought, where things just happen so suddenly. They're into it. They have no idea why they did something. One of the stories, I remember reading this in one of the newspapers many years ago, that in New York subway station, there was a father with two little children. And there was a man standing close by who all of a sudden had an epileptic seizure and fell down onto the tracks or in between the tracks. And without a thought, the father of the two children jumped down. There was a train coming in, jumped down onto the tracks, covered the man's body with his own. And the train went over them without touching them. And when it stopped, the father called out as loudly as he could, please tell my kids I'm okay. And then, gradually the two of them were liberated. He said afterward, he never considered himself to be any kind of a heroic person. That wasn't the kind of thing that he ever thought he would ever do. But something overtook him, something in the one mind that connected him with that man, and he had to do something to try to protect him, and he did. And it's the same kind of thing, when we see video of, someone falls into a river and can't swim, and someone else fully clothed will just hop into the river or dive into the river and rescue that person. Or when somebody goes and pulls somebody out of a burning car without thinking about their own safety. That's when this one mind, this higher consciousness takes over. And we don't need to think. You don't stand back and say, well, am I going to go into that burning car and try to rescue that guy or and start weighing the possibility. You don't do that. Something in us prompts us to just go right into it. And again, it's part of that connection that, we have a deep connection to every person on this planet, except that we forget that we do. And it causes us pain, it causes us grief, it causes us to sometimes hurt other people or to be hurt by others because we're not understanding that we are all one. As Jesus wrote, as it is done unto any one of you, it is done unto me. As you do it to anyone, you're doing it to God. We really, really need to comprehend this and comprehend how we are all one. There's not this separation. We're just the individual waves on the vast sea of God. There's nothing that separates us from that divinity, from that energy, from that intelligence, from that enormous power. You know, we can't even fully describe it because it is so beyond our comprehension. And yet we know that it's there. And so our future really depends upon the larger view. You know, it depends upon us opening up to this, expanding our awareness and realizing that, you know, that person is my brother. That person is my sister. And during these very challenging times, there are so many people who are hurting in so many ways. You know, I was speaking with Reverend Joanna a couple of days ago, or maybe it was yesterday, and I had just seen a woman interviewed saying that, and there have been many people saying they just don't have food. They don't have money to buy food. And this woman said that she and her 2 children sleep a lot of the time. The children are little. And she said she has a big jar of peanut butter. And every day she gives the children 1 tablespoon of peanut butter 3 times a day. Well, I started to cry. I mean, that breaks my heart to think that there are people living at this time in our society who are struggling like this. And what can we do about it? You know, it seems so large and it seems so impossible for us to reach out and help. And I thought about this a lot last night because yesterday afternoon I went to my local supermarket to get some groceries. And I suddenly was, because I'd been thinking about these things, I suddenly thought, you know, where is the food bank bin? Because they had an enormous bin for a food bank that was next to one of the doors. And I couldn't see it. And then I went to the doors that are closed because of COVID. And here's this enormous metal bin sitting there. And I looked inside and there was a box of cereal and there was a jar of something on the bottom of it. That was it, 2 items. And I was horrified because I thought there are people in this city who are hungry. They are going without food. And so I thought, everybody can afford a can of soup or a box of cereal, but they have to find the bin to put it in. And so anyway, the manager was not there yesterday, so I'm calling tomorrow and I'm going to ask him if they will please move the bin to the doors that are open so that people can see them as they're going out. And could they please put a sign on it saying, these donations are going to your local food bank? You know, it's something that I can do. And then I can drop something into it when I'm going in and out of the store. Or I can pack a shopping bag full of groceries and drop it off at the mustard seed. You know, there is all of these little things. If we all do something small, then it becomes something big, you know, and more people become aware. You know, when you see a bin half full rather than 2 things on the bottom of it, you're more inclined to have that settle in unless, it just freaked me out yesterday when I saw that, having heard about the woman who's feeding her children a spoon of peanut butter 3 times a day. We're better than that. We're bigger than that. Each one of us can do something. And so let us, again, remember there is no separation between us and between that mother and those children and that peanut butter. There is no separation between any of us from anyone, anywhere. And when we look at our lives that way, when we look at everything that way, that's when we recognize that 1 + 1 doesn't always equal 2. 1 + 1 equals everyone and everything. And so it is. And so I bless you all today, and I thank you for the contributions that you make to our center. Some of you are working behind the scenes, still doing volunteer work. That goes on all the time. And some of you are still tithing to us, either through PayPal on our website, which is cslvictoria.org, or through e-transfers. You know how to do it. And I just want you to know that we so appreciate every donation that comes in. You know, during the last wave of the pandemic, we did very, very well. And, it is our intention to do well during this phase of it as well, so that everything is in good order when we get back together again. So I invite you to do that if it feels right to you in your hearts. Everything that you do and who you be is always greatly appreciated. And I invite you now to just go into a closing prayer with me. I just give thanks to God for this time together, for the remembrance that we are all one, that we are all one with Spirit, all one with this infinite power, this infinite potentiality that is there just waiting for us to take charge of it and to do something wonderful with it. We have access to this one great mind that we're all part of, this great energy. And I know that right here and right now, we are connected to it. And as we go forward into this week, we feel that connection more and more. And we each get our own divine inspiration about what it is that we can do to honor our connection to the billions of people on this planet, to help to create a better world, a better life for everyone. Let us not buy into negativity. Let us not buy into feelings of lack. We are bigger and better than that. We know the truth of who we are. We know that we are each individual expressions of God, and this power works in, as, and through us in this moment, in every day, all days, forever and ever. And so I say thank you and I bless you on your way. Have an absolutely wonderful week. And so it is.